Thanks, John. Next, I'd like to introduce and bring Ariel Zeidban to the podium. Ariel.
Hello. So basically, I'll be talking about adding and how we can use some of the precision tools that we are talking about. In particular, in field trials. Field trials can be important not only for discovering new products, but also to show the value of different products to the farmers, to the final users. So I'll be also talking about how we are displaying and sharing the results of the field trials and sharing some ideas about that. So you are probably familiar with this photo, but this is the way we were collecting data in the field in the 60s. Before that, a lot of people are still doing this, pen and paper. I still do this at some point in the field, but in this case, we are limited by manual labor. And this is the case for field trials and agronomy in general. I'm an agronomist by training. Agronomy is usually considered a poor data, not poor because of the quality, but because of the amount of data that we can collect. It's all based on field. It was historically based on field observations, and the data was limited by manual labor. As we have all these new technologies. In this case, this is a high-throughput phenotyping machine. We have different sensors. This is not necessarily a machine that a farmer will have, but it's a machine that seed companies may have. We are still developing those, but this can measure a lot of different phenotypic traits, visible and also non-visible, doing non-destructive measurement, which is also very interesting. So basically what is limiting now us is not the manual labor, but actually the processing. And we are all going through the same ideas over and over again, so I don't want for you to get bored with these ideas. One issue that I see is that even though we in this case, those pictures are separated by 50 years, the way in which we display the data in a lot of cases are still tables in paper. And I have to say this, it's not a critic to the industry, but it seems that we love tables, like printed on paper. And I think that at some point we still have this mentality of basically what I call managing for the average, and I will explain. I will be talking about this. But even in the case now that we have multi-hybrid planters, and basically when we plot the results of different field trials, we can put in the x-axis the average yield trial, and then in the y-axis the yield of each specific variety of or hybrid. We are still talking about race horses or work horses, and this is actually kind of a new concept that we have with multi-hybrid. It's not that the idea of basically what the slope is giving us is the stability of the different seed types here, varieties or hybrids. This is not a new concept, but the way in which we are thinking this is still linked to this idea of the average. The x-axis in this case is still the average yield for that trial. So we are not talking about specific limitations, and I wanted to I'll be talking more about this, but I think that sometimes we are in this trap of big data, which is basically let's put all the data in one place and let's look for trends. And in that case, we'll be missing the more small and fine-grained things that are actually the ones that I think that add value. In this case, for example, if we are looking at the x-axis in the lower side, and this is a made-up graph, as you can tell, but okay, we should be able to tell what's the actual limitation of that environment, not actually that's a poor or a lower production environment. And I think that this idea of managing for the average, it's still linked to the way in which agronomists we were taught about how to conduct field trials, which is actually linked to the way we do statistics also. This is a book by Ronald Fisher, who is known as the father of modern statistics. Most of his work was done in the UK, in Rothamsted, in the 20s and 30s. So all the different statistical tools and the toolbox that he developed for field trials, that is actually these are actually the statistical tools that we use not only in agriculture but in other sciences. They are still linked to this idea of removing the effect of the environment. And I know that plant breeders do this a lot because that's what you're trying to do. But what we need to start doing, not only, and I know that you are doing it, but I'm trying to push or I'm trying to make the call for more, is to actually include the effect of the environment and trying to understand the effect of the environment and not always trying to remove the effect of the environment. How many of you are familiar with this, with TEDs? They are called technology extrapolation domains. Can you raise your hand, the people who are familiar with this? Okay, few people. Okay, so this is a work that was, at least it was started by people in the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Basically what they did is, the motivation of this was different, but basically the idea is, where should I put the different field trials? Where should I locate all my field trials? And I know that seed companies, sometimes what they do is that the amount of field trials or the density of field trials is a function of the density of customers, not necessarily, but that's not responding to they are not optimizing basically for having representative environments and placing field trials in representative environments. So basically what this group did, they took 3 different variables. One is growing degree days, another one is something that they call aridity index, which is the ratio between evapotranspiration and precipitation. And the other one, they calculated water holding capacity in the soil, and they divided basically the US, or where we grow grain in the US, most of the areas, into different, what they call technology extrapolation domains. Now there is a program called Nutrient Star from EDF using these, all these zones. So basically it's dividing the US into different zones, and each one of these zones or these domains, it's basically different from the other one, and it's not only interesting to place field trials, but also to know where to extrapolate the results from the field trials in that domain to that domain in particular, and not to other places. There is, I would say that even though I think it's a very good idea and this is all publicly available, the link is down there, I would say that still the data is based on past data. So when we place a field trial, we don't know how the weather will be, basically. So there are still some issues with that, and I will come back to this idea because this is not static. Like the environment is also the year and the weather. It's not only the soil. The other way of, another thing that we can do with geospatial data is basically understanding field variability. This is basically a field with some different management zones, and this was done with all publicly available data. You can pull publicly available weather data, but not for this. But for this, you can pull basically soil data, topography data, and satellite data. All of these can be done basically by someone who can code with very basic skills of coding in R or Python. There are very good APIs to pull data from the different places where this data lives. So you don't need to necessarily have a very fancy tool to develop these management zones. And I'm saying this because I don't think that understanding field variability has to be something only reserved for big companies. Small companies can, and in my opinion, should also develop these kind of tools also in-house. Again, it's few lines of code. I'm an agronomist by training. I know how to do this. It's not difficult. If you want to sit with me half hour, I'll explain to you how to do it. Not that difficult. The other thing is that we have also all these remote sensing platforms, not only satellite. Now, for example, in 2018, we'll have, there is a constellation of satellites called Sentinel from the European Union, which is totally free, and it will be every 5 days. We'll have a new image of each part of the planet, and you can calculate, they have different bands, so you can get something like this, which is an NDVI map, WDRVI. You can use different combinations of bands and indices. But basically, again, not to go back to what other presenters were talking about, but basically compared to what we did in the past, we don't need to necessarily send people to a field all the time. We are not sampling, we are actually taking the entire plot as our data point. So there are, and we are also not necessarily messing with the trial plots. We can do this without even going to the field and having much more data points. So again, a lot of benefits from remote sensing and all the different types of data that we can collect. I want to bring this is a paper that was published this year in European Journal of Agronomy. And this was a trial that they did with different wheat varieties and different nitrogen treatments. And the map that you see in the back, that's an electrical conductivity map. Electrical conductivity is a proxy basically for clay content, also for salinity, but by collecting soil samples, you can understand if that variability is given by each one of these variables. Let's say that it's clay content in this case. So you can see how even if we do, if we randomize the different treatments and and we have the replicates randomized throughout the trial, the effect of the environment won't be necessarily the same. And this is the case with almost any field trial that we do. So it's very important not only to collect data from the plants or from the crop, but also to collect data from the intrinsic variability of the field, in this case, clay content. And basically what they did is instead of running a typical two-way ANOVA, they ran something called an ANCOVA, analysis of covariance, and the covariate that they used was this electrical conductivity map. And they actually were not able to find differences in the treatments with the ANOVA, but they were able to basically reduce the noise from the given by intrinsic soil variability. I'll go now. I'll kind of switch gears a little bit, and are we okay with time? Okay. Maybe I'm talking too fast, and this is my accent. I'm from Argentina, so I hope you understand at least 10% of what I'm trying to say here. Something that I think it's very important is that usually I'm an agronomist. Now I work in the middle of San Francisco in an office, but I'm used to work in the field. And I think that sometimes there is this connection between the R&D part of the company and the people doing sales and marketing. I'm not saying that I have too much to say about that, but I spent some time on Twitter, and I found this tweet to be pretty informative. This is the farmer saying, I've been contacted by 4 different seed salesmen today via text, Snapchat, phone call, and one rode in the combine, all before noon. I need a beer. Someone is saying, someone should have brought you a beer. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. He's totally right. But I want to basically make two cases based on this tweet. The first one is that we have all these different tools now for communications, but I think that we need to start trying to understand better what are we communicating to the customer, because we have all this data in the background, but it's actually all this data that we have being reflected in the sales process or placing the product. I think that there is a lot of work to be done there. In particular, that tweet was in November. A lot of phone calls get made. Basically, there are a lot of calls, visits, etc. in November, trying to push products. That's when a lot of the conversations are happening between retailers and customers, or seed reps and farmers. But I think that product placement should be a year-round process. This idea that we pick up the phone, I don't pick up the phone, but you get what I mean. Like someone picks up the phone or visits and tries to sell a product at that point in time. I think that we should be doing this throughout the year. In this case, in the right, what you see is basically notes from a scouting app, in this case, our scouting app, and all the different notes that this scout did throughout the field. I think that this source of data is usually the most interesting source of data and usually the most overlooked source of data, which is the direct observations that scouts made in the field. Usually they go to a field, something gets reported to the farmer, I found this, period, lost. How many sales opportunities there can be created based, or product placement opportunities can be created based on scouting data? I think there is a lot to be done there. And so far, as someone who has experience doing scouting, we can't look for aphids or spider mites from a drone, or we need someone there. And it will be a long time until we get a machine that can detect those kind of issues. And the other thing, it has to do with messaging. This is another tweet. Maybe you get that I spend a lot of time on Twitter. I deleted the app, so I don't have it anymore. I'm trying to get out of Twitter. But you can, so basically, he's saying, this is another farmer saying the first seed dealer that says their variety didn't win their plot publicly gets an audience on an early seed order. And again, this is the idea that going back to this, this idea of publishing tables, publishing rankings, is like, this is the best. This is the best, number one, top. I think that if we are in this context of going into a more fine-grained recommendations. So again, it's not about erasing and removing the effect of the environment, but it's about saying, my seed is the best for this farm, for this particular field, because of this data that I collected, not only satellite data, like all the data that we have, it should be used also to explain and to make a case for our product. And I think that we are not doing a great job at that. There are some companies doing very interesting things, but I think that there is this gap between all the data that we are collecting and how we are placing our product. Again, just some ideas there. And the last one is, even though like a very typical approach for precision agriculture is, let's collect 5 years worth of data, let's average that data, that's your map now, that's your field. In my experience, fields, sometimes they behave like average, but sometimes they don't. And there are a lot of years, and with climate change, and we see the effects. Like I don't need to sell you on anything. I'm from Argentina. We have a lot of issues with water in the last years. This idea of average field, it's something from the past. Like we need to start thinking on it's. On the other hand, it's kind of a conundrum because we can't think on an average field, but on the other hand, we cannot predict the future. So the idea, in my mind, should be something like a scenario-based approach, where at the end it has to do with, first, some tools that we may have or some about understanding the weather in this particular season, but on the other hand, it should be placed on the broader context of the farmer and how much risk is he or she willing to take based on the data that we have at the time of planting. So that's all. It's kind of a bunch of different thoughts put all together. Thank you for your time.